You're listening to another ambitious entrepreneurnetwork.com podcast, the voice for entrepreneurs and small business. Now, onto the show.
You're listening to the award-winning podcast, The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, featuring business leaders to help you navigate a constantly changing marketplace. Want to become known as a trusted authority while building a thriving business you love? The Ambitious Entrepreneur Show will show you how. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Cross.
And welcome to another episode of the Ambitious Entrepreneur Show, brought to you by the Influence Alliance, the business building community for coaches and consultants who want to make a much bigger impact in the world while build a profitable and scalable business. I'm your host, Anne-Marie Cross. Now, my guest today says there is no innovation without experimentation and collaboration. So joining me on today's show is Janet Sernack. Janet, she is the founder of ImagineNation, a global innovation consulting and learning company that helps organizations, leaders, teams, and coaches adapt, innovate, and grow through disruption. She is an ICF PCC executive coach, an award-winning global blogger on the people side of innovation, and presenter of the ICF CCE Coach for Innovators certification program. Now, on today's show, Janet is going to share. We're going to be inspired by her multiple and constant career and reinventions and learn from that. We're also going to see that the pandemic is an opening for creativity, invention, and innovation, as well as how to survive and thrive with disruption. So welcome to the show, Janet.
Hi, Anne-Marie. Thank you so much for inviting me. Delighted to be here.
So welcome. So welcome. I know we're going to dive deep, and the insights that you're going to share, incredibly valuable, as well as invaluable for the many different challenges and complexities that businesses are faced with today around the world. What is it about innovation that you love? Because your entire career has really focused on this particular area. What is it about it that really stands out for you?
Oh, thank you. What a great question to start with. Well, firstly, growing up in the fashion industry here in Australia, it was always about change. You know, it was change of season, change of look, so change of focus, change of color, fabric. So I grew up with change, and I really love change. And of course, it was a very creative industry. And I guess I've always loved to be creative. I have actually trained as a graphic designer in one of my very many reinventions. And also, as I've evolved and my career has evolved, is that I've realized if you truly want to make a difference and a change in the world, then innovation is the lever.
And how would you define innovation?
That's another really good question. We're very non-prescriptive, and we just start with the sentence is that it's change that adds value, which means that the focus is on value, and then you have to ask yourself the question, what does value mean to the customer, to the end user, or to the client, or to people in general? So it actually creates an opening for what we call a creative conversation to define innovation in your own unique context, because most people don't understand what it means, so that you've got to like deep dive and make it meaningful, and we say make sense of it in your own context.
Yes. I love how you've described that, and you've ended by saying in your own context, because whilst we may see other organizations, whether they be smaller organizations, you know, through to medium or even larger organizations, it's to their context and to the context of what's happening for them. But we can certainly take elements of that. What do you see is the greatest barrier for any organization to actually embrace and being more innovative? Are there some commonalities that you see?
Another really good question. Yes, the first thing is to be strategic. I think what I've learned as I've been unpacking innovation and making sense of it over the last 10 years or so as a focus for my business is that you need to be strategic. So, why innovate and what result are you expecting to get in terms of whether it's business growth, whether it's efficiency, whether it is to actually create new products and services. So, being strategic and knowing why, I think most organizations just see it as a faddish thing, to get a short term result. The other way of being strategic is to consider about whether you want to, whether it's appropriate to look at innovation from an incremental perspective, from a breakthrough perspective, or just from a product portfolio perspective. And then the other thing is that it's systemic. So you can actually innovate across every area of your business, whether it's a process, a set of behaviors, or, a set of activities.
Mm-hmm.
So people, especially at the moment, are looking very much at the short term, whereas certainly what I've done in the last 2 years of being locked down, and I know Anne-Marie, you can empathise with that, is to really look at the opportunity for delivering a valuable and sustainable result down the track in the future. So if you're going to innovate, the biggest barrier is to be in it for the long term,
Yes.
to really look at how customers are changing, how the market has shifted, and to be very intentional
Mm-hmm.
and very focused, on what value or what difference you want to create for users. Yeah.
Yes.
So, lots of barriers. I think the other thing that's really important to mention is the resistance to change. And here in Australia, we're investing billions in in submarines, but not in aircraft to put out bushfires. It's like, hello. So there's a lot of inertia and complacency in this market, thinking this too shall pass, and I think it won't. So
Yeah. So you need
innovation
to
is
link to this
is
show to
is
the powers that be. I am so with you. I'm so with you. But it sounds as if organizations, again, no matter what size you're at, so take what we're sharing today and what Janet is sharing today and apply it for where you're at in the stage of growth, I would imagine, in your business. But it looks as if organizations need to keep a finger on the pulse always to see, are there different ways we can be doing things to ensure that the customer experience and what we're doing. And when we talk about customers and stakeholders and shareholders, this is even for our team as well. I mean, we can put an incredible barrier with our team if the technologies that we're giving them are not working properly or appropriate for the
yeah.
job that they're doing. So it looks that there has to be a balance between immediacy and more of a long-term aspect. And we have to incorporate that in the way that we just do business. It has to, isn't it?
Spot on, Anne Marie. We just did a webinar yesterday, which is how do you manage the present and the future
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously. And we talk about three horizons, like business today to cash flow and sustain funding, the future, and then incremental changes to actually break through in radical ways in the future. So we talk about that being paradoxical, and a lot of the work that we do, especially in coaching, is teaching people how to be present to what is without judging or making it wrong or right,
Yes.
and with what could be. So being in that space of possibility. And I think that despite being locked down, I still live in beautiful Bayside Melbourne. I went down to the beach this morning. I can still buy great food and go for walks in nature with my two little dogs. So it's a time to incubate, and to deep dive into what could be possible. Be grateful in a
Yes.
lot of ways and appreciative for what we have, but to really deep dive into how it could be a better place or a better world, even if you're a company of one.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It's a real pause button opportunity.
Yes, I've realized in this period of time, I've always said I'm an extroverted introvert, but I did not realize how much of an introvert I was. The thing is, though, with introverts and visionaries, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this, when we have moments or opportunities to really just sit in our creativity, the creative juices just go wild, don't they? And it's a matter of, well, where are we best placed to be able to adapt and adopt right now, and what things are more for a longer term vision. And that kind of leads me to a question then. And I know that often with when it comes to innovation, we want to have people on our team, and we may be that person, who are visionaries, who can spot trends and who can share that in a way that inspires and empowers others to get behind that. Do you think that vision, and the type of vision that I'm sure you are, because you're in the role, can that be taught, or is it something that you see as more nurtured? I mean, that is a whole topic on its own, isn't it?
I'm so glad you asked it, because a lot of what we're teaching is in many ways really obvious, in that we have a slogan is to hit your pause button, retreat and reflect, and then reboot and reset. So what the COVID disruption has created for us is like a big stop sign to start thinking differently. So that's the first step, is just to stop doing stuff. Like I'm working with some of the global coaching platforms, and the hardest thing with some of the new clients is just getting them to stop doing stuff. Just stop and think about, what are you doing, and am I actually really doing the right thing to get the result that I want? Or stop and ask yourself, what is the result I want, and what is it then that I need to do? So again, it's paradoxical. And I come from the school of learning that says, possible in the world, possible for me. It's only a matter of how. So you can learn to be a visionary. And you've just raised a really good point, is that passionate purpose is to be passionately purposeful about something and be determined to achieve it, is the grit,
Yes.
according to Angela Duckworth, that we need to thrive in the 21st century. And we're doing a lot of programs now on helping leaders and teams cultivate that kind of grit, and it's about character and intentionality and purposefulness, and pursuing that kind of meaning in your work and in your life. So anybody can be a visionary if they'll just stop, and think about what's really important to them and live their values and live their beliefs. It's not easy. It's a much tougher gig, and it is far more satisfying and fulfilling when you're willing to be courageous and compassionate and creative and play in that space.
I could not agree with you more. I mean, I often, and I have shared on a number of occasions, so I won't reiterate that same story, but I'll bullet point it, if you will, by saying, my worst business failure ever, and I've had many, but, that fail forward is something that my whole life, and, as visionaries, as people who will embrace change, and for me, who wants to do the same old anyway, so when people are talking about, I want to go back to normal, I'm going, nah, normal was boring. Let's reinvent and reinvigorate. But, my worst business failure ever was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was the kick in the backside that I really needed to go, well, look, moving forward, you've got two choices. It'll either make you or break you. And for me, breaking me is not an option. So what can I learn? What can I change? What can I do better? And I've realized that, for me, focus and not going off on all the bright, shiny objects, which we can tend to do as entrepreneurs. And that has been a huge wake up call, if you will, for me and many businesses, I think, as they're looking and pausing and stopping and really refining what they're doing. For some have got incredible success stories, and what started off as a mere pivot has become a huge revenue stream for their business, because they were willing to to go through the steps, if you will, to say how is this going to pan out. So you think willingness to be to see what is possible, I think is that often that risk factor is something that
Yes.
people are not really willing to go for, but sometimes can be the best thing ever. Well, how do we balance that? Is there such a term as balanced risk? You know what I mean? Having some form of container, if you will, so that we don't kind of come crashing to a heap.
Look, it's such a great point, and thank you for bringing it up. So before I before I started Compass Learning and ImagineNation, I worked for a company called Corporate Vision, and they were Australia's first culture change consultancy, and we did a lot of transformational leadership programs. And one of the programs was around achievement and accountability. And what a high achiever does is learns how to moderate the risk with the level of challenge, and obviously the propensity for failure. So it's really interesting is that we are now designing learning and coaching programs to help people strategize to fail forward or fail fast. So a lot of it is understanding why people avoid risk, why people avoid failing, and really where we've gotten to, it's about cultivating what we would call a gamer or an experimental mindset, where you can actually balance the risks with the rewards. So that's what high achievers do. So we can model that and we can teach it, and we do so. But here, to take risks, you actually need to be brave and bold, and they're kind of old-fashioned words in a way. And when we were living in the Middle East for 6 years, I really learnt what it meant to be courageous and to take the risks and to have, like you, the monumental and spectacular failures, and to develop more than resilience. We call it mental toughness and emotional agility to learn from it and to reboot. So yeah, it is teachable, and it is fundamental to entrepreneurship, and it's
Yes.
fundamental to high achievement. But you've got to work out what the balance is, and then you've got to prepare yourself cognitively, emotionally, and viscerally to face the consequences. So we talk about risk anticipation, we talk about risk mitigation, and even now working with teams to develop a new language around risk. But we are here in Australia a very risk adverse culture.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes, we
So it's a
certainly
tough
are. And
one.
hopefully, what's happened now and continues to happen. I mean, some of the businesses that are just about to reopen and then it closes again. I mean, that must just be heartbreaking for them. But it really has shown us, I mean, when you were teaching your clients and sharing the message, a number of years ago, expect the unexpected. I do not think
Yes.
that anyone would have gone to such an extreme of what we are now, or have experienced, that's for sure. So our awareness of, well, these things we need to balance. I think a lot of businesses now have realized that if they haven't embraced the online space, it is so important to have an aspect of being able to have, deliverables. And I know a lot of our audience, Janet, are service-based businesses. So they really are primed to be able to embrace the online space and have been for years, actually. I mean, I'm sure that you are in the smaller group. I know I was, that for many years, businesses would say to me, my colleagues would say, what are you online for? What are you doing all of this social media? Why are you podcasting? And, would often look at me as if I was quite strange. And to me, it was, well, I don't want to say, I told you so, that kind of thing. But seriously, we have to be mindful of what's happening and where consumers are going for attention, and every single business has an opportunity now to be their own media. I mean, we all carry our own technology in our back pocket, so we have no barrier to being able to get our message, connect directly with our customers, consumers, stakeholders, shareholders. And I think a lot of businesses were kicking and screaming. In fact, one thing that I want to share, and then I want to open it up to, where are some opportunities that you see that businesses can embrace? But I heard, and I can't remember who said this, so I can't validate this with a name, but they were saying that the rate of change that has happened in the last kind of 2 years is probably what would have been seen if things had continued on before all this happened over a 6-year period. That's how
Yes.
fast it's accelerated. Are you seeing that too?
Yeah, we're living, Otto Sharma says, so like the meta frame is that we're living in a decade of transformation, and we're also living in a decade of disruption.
Yes.
So uncertainty, if anything, is the new normal. It's uncertainty.
Yes.
So the hybrid workplace, I went online probably 10 years ago when I was living in the Middle East because I had no choice. It was the only way I could get work. So
Yes.
innovation comes from necessity. And so there's a lot of necessity at the moment, but also from possibility. So if you collide those internal filters or meta programs, then you can come up with a heap of opportunities to play in the global workplace. And I'll give you an example. I had an email 2 days ago from somebody who is really an amazing specialist in innovation and gamification in Spain. And he said, "Oh, we want to partner with you because you have this really big following in Spain for your blogs and your webinars. And, it would be really great if you could represent our online learning gamified programs, and then maybe we could co-create and do this." And I had no idea that I had a following in Spain. But what I've been doing, like you, is every month I write a blog. Every 2 months now we do a webinar. Everything's free. We've got a big community. We've got a lot of social media or a lot of internet marketing presence on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm a woman with 33 years of entrepreneurship this month since I left my corporate career. So I'm wiser, but I'm also older. So being online gives me the chance to really share my knowledge, wisdom, and experience with people who want to take it up rather than trying to break into the boys' network here in Australia, which is really tough for women and especially for older women.
Yes. Yeah. One of the things that you said, and I want to just touch on this because seeing the pandemic as an opening for creativity, invention, and innovation, I'm sure when we said that, I said that in the introduction, people might have thought, what on earth is she talking about? And that is the mindset that we have around that. So we can either see it as a necessity and being dragged there, or if we change our mindset to think, well, what possibilities can I learn? And that comes from us, isn't it? So we can either go and screaming, and if we do it kicking and screaming, we often limit our ability to look at and continue a thought process. What is that thought? Can we amplify it even more? Can we put a twist on that? If depending on how you approach that is going to end up where that allows you to travel or go with that thought. Would you say that's a fair comment?
I agree 100%. So what we start off with saying to people, get out of the office. And the first step is to get out of your head.
Yes.
Get out of your habitual way of thinking and get out of your habitual mental models and your mindsets, and actually let them go because they're not relevant for the 21st century. The 21st century requires a whole different way of being, thinking, and acting, a whole different way of leading and teaming, a whole different way of building a culture, whether it's individually or collectively. So that's like, get out of your head, get into your heart, find out what's important, And we are so privileged to be living with such exponential technology that you can find out anything on the internet. Like I was and giving you another example, I was at a session yesterday where the question was asked, how was 2021 for you? And people went into all of the negatives. And I was the only one in the group that just said, well, it was awesome. I could really appreciate the environment that I live in and the nature and the sea and my husband and my beautiful home. And I could stop and actually pivot my business globally online. And now I've got a whole new strategy for scaling and leveraging it that 2 years ago I never would have thought possible.
Well, you
So
and I connected because I was looking on LinkedIn and I found you and I thought, wow, what an incredible background. And I love innovation. As I said, I love challenging the status quo. Tradition, I don't even like that word. Who wants traditions, because it can lead to better things. And so it really is. We are a globally connected community now. And we've proven that what happens in one part of this globe can impact an entire planet. And I love the way that you said, there's information at our fingertips. So be mindful about the community in which you are hanging out. And I share that if I look back to the career industry, which is where I came from. When I first got my certification, and then they kind of went, well, congratulations, you can go make a business. And it was like, well, what am I going to do? I went out and I sought mentors in the US because I had seen and even experienced phone coaching. But back then, the industry that I was in said, you can't phone coach. You can't use email. Back then, Skype and all of those tools weren't created. But I thought, why not? I'm still communicating with people. So I actually had to go out and find mentors who understood and who are actually doing that. And then it was podcasting. What's a podcast? It wasn't even talked about in those days. So be mindful that the industry or the community or even the platforms you're going to for your information aren't jaded and shaded by their agendas or their minimalist or, their thinking is not the visionary. And we've got so much different tools and abilities to connect. That's important, isn't it, to be mindful of that?
It's so important because if you are going to be a disruptor, like you and I obviously are, where I'm a serial change catalyst and disruptor, you have to find your tribe because it can be really lonely. So when we were living in the Middle East, I found that people already in the innovation space, so this is around 2012, were so generous and so collaborative in sharing and we were just pioneering. When I started talking about the people side of innovation at global conferences, the European process consultants would go, oh no, just get rid of the people. It's all about technology. And I knew from my change management career that technology is driven by people and it's people who innovate,
Yes.
so technology is just the enabler.
Yeah.
So you finding your tribe is really important. And there is now, globally, the connections that you can make are extraordinary. And finding your tribe really supports you to be the change you want to be in the world and to also engage and enroll and enable others to do that. So I love the online world. I spend far too much time online.
But you can learn so much. One of the absolute gifts, and I call it a gift because I'm honored to be able to. Well, I was going to say we can't go cheek to cheek, but face to face, virtually, if you will, tap into the knowledge and experience such as what you bring to the table. And I get to do that every day that I have an interview, and I learn so much. It's on steroids, and that's the benefit of being able to tap in to individuals and experts experts such as yourself. One question that I would love to ask, and there's a reason I'm asking this of you, because so often as individuals, we negate the experiences that we've had because they haven't been in a previous industry that we're now working in, or we think, well, that was from ages ago, doesn't relate, doesn't matter, doesn't count. But in actual fact, some of the things, the things we can learn from hindsight in history that provides the insight, which will give us the foresight for how we need to move forward. Are you, or have you seen that we often neglect that? And I guess you can share your story because you bring such a diversity and wealth that I'm sure that you are often looking back to and thinking, how can I allow this to move me forward? So there's a couple of things within that, but I would love for you to unpack that if you could.
Okay, well, I think, I come from a perspective that everything is a learning opportunity, even if it's painful. So I think, and I'm also a history buff and a culture buff. So my hobby is history, whether it's ancient or modern history or different cultures. So I've gone through Japanese periods, Chinese and Indian most recently. So if we don't learn from the lessons of the past, we're doomed to repeat them.
Yes.
So, it's like I had in my younger years, I am going into a personal example again. I had a lot of boyfriends who were really narcissistic. So I had to go through a lot of emotional pain to let go of that pattern. But ultimately, I did, and I learned, and I have the most wonderful partner in the world now who is absolutely not a narcissist. He supports me in my business, and he's wonderful, wonderfully generous and accepting of me. So, having this having the ability to unlearn, and that's probably, my example. I unlearned that set of behaviors. And
Yes.
I've learned a new set of behaviors that support me to be empowered and effective in the world. So being a learnaholic is really important. And I think, if this decade of anything is just go out and learn. And I'm so in agreement with you. When I got into the innovation space, I did a multitude I did every webinar I could. I did
Everything is
MOOCs.
interesting, isn't
I
it?
did. I did MOOCs with the university. I did a MOOC, for example, in critical thinking free on iversity from a professor in Romania who was amazing. So,
Yeah.
I learned through doing online learning, I learned how to design online learning programs. So,
Yeah. There,
learning,
there is such a richness of
yep,
information. And you know what I love about the online learning, particularly being able to download resources? You can put people on double speed. You can't do that in real life. And I love, give it to me quick and just, these so I can really think about things and how I can adapt and adopt them. But it is true, isn't it? And often, and this is what I would do too, and this is a great way to kind of fire up, if you will, the creative, the thinking is go outside your industry. What are they doing and what can you adopt and adapt? That's so important. So often we look within our own industry, and a lot of times our own industry is blinded by the things that we talked about today, their understandings, or in some instances misunderstandings. And we've got Simon here, Hodgins, who says unlearning is as important as learning. 100%. Yeah, absolutely, Simon. Thanks for sharing that comment there. And he said 2 times is a blessing. Absolutely. Sometimes we've got to learn and unlearn a lot of times, but I think that once that learning is there, it's something that you can often pass on to others. I think the biggest challenges that I've overcome, and the way that I will approach something, like if there's an obstacle, can I go under it, around it, over it, or do I just have to blow that thing up? Often the strategies, the methodologies that come out of it are teachable moments and steps, aren't they, for others? You've gone for so that others don't have to. But then there's some of us who we need to kind of go through the experience anyway, but we can do it a lot quicker by learning and bringing insights that others have shared, I find.
Oh, absolutely. And like you said, I used to stand up in training programs and say, expect the unexpected. I used to stand up and say the learning zone is outside of the comfort zone. And I don't think it was until I created ImagineNation as an Israeli startup that I really viscerally got what that meant, like head, heart, and gut. So we now say, there's the comfort zone, there's the learning zone, and there's the growth zone. So
Yes.
we now, in this decade, this is a huge growth zone individually, collectively, and globally. It
Yes.
is, and you've got to be brave. You've got to be courageous. You've got to be creative, and you've got to be compassionate. So that growth zone, we talk a lot about being evocative, provocative, creative, disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to disrupt your old habits. You've got to provocate far more challenging conversations. You've got to evoke people to step into their growth zones, so it's a whole pulling strategy, and people don't realize that innovation involves change on steroids,
Yes.
so it's a growth zone opportunity, and it is on the one hand terrifying, but on the other hand it is incredibly fulfilling and
Yeah.
satisfying, and
Yeah.
then you can add value to the quality of people's lives in ways they appreciate and cherish, and that's ultimately what the benefit is from being in the innovation growth zone.
Yeah, I just love everything that you're saying, and I know that we've only just really scratched the surface, but it has to be almost a mindset and a behaviour, and the behaviour, I mean taking action. It really
Yep.
does. And having said that too, I mean there are going to be some people that. As you said, are very adversant to change, but they're more the ones that will roll out, that the follow through people. So as individuals running businesses, we need to be mindful that if we had a whole team of innovators, we'd be innovating, and then the work, the implementation things is important there too. But we need to find that balance. And one of the things, and this is going to lead me to you sharing how people can get in contact with you. I mean, one of the things that you said, that it really requires collaboration. You shared an incredible story of a conversation that someone reached out from Spain. They have got expertise in the area of gamification. Now you're looking at doing some form of collaboration. Another thing that I have found too, that to sit in this space does require boldness and courage. And I have even had some of my team over the years, I would just say to them, come up to me, point a finger at me, and just go, just do it, Anne-Marie. And they'll do it. And I go, okay, I am. And that was just because I'm an introvert, ringing someone on a phone. I mean, the things that we do. But what I'm saying is we need to surround ourselves with people who will lift us up, people such as yourself, who
Yes.
will kind of give us that gentle shake. Because if we again surround ourselves with yes people and not the people who will agitate in the most nicest of ways, we're still going to be where we are today, where we could be far more advanced in the future. So how can people find out more about the work that you do? Tap into these incredible webinars that you talked about, all of that.
Okay, well, there's two websites. There's ImagineNation, so that's spelled ImagineNation, imagination.com.au is one website. And then I have a personal website, which is just simply janetsernack.com.au. You can sign up for our newsletter, our monthly newsletter and award-winning blog, which comes out usually in the first 2 weeks of the month. We do webinars. The next webinar will be, I think, in November. And you connect with me on LinkedIn, certainly. And there's a Coach for Innovators Facebook page. There's an ImagineNation Facebook page. And there's an ImagineNation LinkedIn page as well. So everything that Anne-Marie said is about connection. And connection, I think, is probably one of the most important first steps to take to be to flourish and thrive, certainly in the 21st century. So when you connect, then you can then explore, And when you can explore, you can then discover. When you discover, you can then design, and then you can do what Anne-Marie says, is deliver something by taking intelligent actions. Please email me. I have a Coach for Innovators certified program starting in October. It's 8 weeks, 2 hours of webinars a week, and we're very generous and we share all of our IP to help you reinvent or improve your business, or learn to become a certified coach for innovators. It's very much a deep and immersive and intimate learning experience, and just, have a conversation. There's a
Absolutely.
collective, there's a global collective of us. So join us.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And what I love about this platform, if you will, that we're live streaming, and this will also go on our audio version of our podcast, is that we get to also incorporate other people's comments. And of course, Simon is here, and if you show up and you get to be part of the conversation, he's a comfort, learning, growth zones, change on steroids. And yes, the last year has certainly forced changes. Hopefully, this helps people to experience new ways of doing things. And Simon, yes, Janet and I certainly agree. And hopefully people who are hearing and tapping into the conversation, Janet, know and realize that, look, there is support out there with Janet's team and global connections and network that you're building. We don't have to do it on our own. And as
yeah,
you said earlier, it is important to surround yourself with like-minded people, because, and this is what I shared in one of the interviews I said today, an idea that you have or that someone in your community has needs to be nurtured in the right way, because may just be the solution the world needs in a decade or a couple of years. And if that's not nurtured, there goes this incredible opportunity that could have been the solution and the answer for the world. It needs to be nurtured.
yeah. And Anne-Marie, it is about persistence. Like, people told me 10 years ago when I launched, a startup in Israel as an older woman who was not local. You're not from here. How can you do this? And no one would give me any money because I didn't have any guarantors. Is persistence, is if really believe in yourself. It does come down to a few basics. Is, be persistent, be determined, be prepared to confront adversity. So we've gone slower because we bootstrapped,
Yeah.
as a startup.
Slow and steady, isn't
But
it? I always say that. Look, I'm in this for the long game. I'm
yeah,
stubborn. I'm stubborn. I do not take no for an answer. I'll just
yeah,
take my time in getting to the yes. But I tell you what, start to enjoy the journey though, because there's so many golden nuggets in the
yeah,
journey as well, I think.
yeah, and go out onto, go to the edge.
Yeah.
This is an edgy era. There's
Yeah.
so many possibilities and opportunities to do that. And I think, there's be future focused. Go out and find out. Do some research. Be adaptive.
Yeah.
Be willing to engage and collaborate. Be willing to innovate, and be digitally savvy. 10 years ago, I wasn't even on Facebook. And now we're looking at how are we going to gamify our learning programs, and to globalize them. So it's not that hard. It's just one step at
Yeah,
a
one
time.
step.
Yeah.
You don't have to do the whole thing at the one time. The steps, and I'm the same. Don't follow trends. Drive trends. Be the trend, and it
Yeah.
can be the smallest of things. Even a 1% difference can be the difference needed in your industry. I think the breath of fresh air, and there's so many opportunities. I mean, there has been a global reset, isn't it? Many
Oh,
large
yes.
organizations that were leading industries are now having to reinvent. Some of them won't be able to, but for the smaller organizations who are far more agile, they may not
Yes.
realize the smallness of your organization is actually a benefit, because you can move quicker, isn't it? Often, if you have the right things in
I'm
place.
so glad you mentioned agility. I think that's another really misunderstood term. It's speed and agility. in bite-sized chunks that are really purposeful. It's quite interesting. Some of the work we've been doing is teaching agile teams how to actually innovate, because
Really?
there's a disconnect between the agile movement and innovation. They probably won't agree with me.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, being agile and nimble and fast. So therefore you need to be open-minded, open-hearted and open-willed, and not controlling, and be compassionate and be creative and playful. You know,
Mm.
bring wonder and play and awe and all of the novelty. You know, there's so much. Look what's happening to retail. You know,
Yes.
I said to my husband on the weekend, I'm going shopping, you know, so I went online for half an hour and picked up a few things that I was really desperate for, you
Yeah.
know.
It's dangerous though, this online shopping. At a push of a button, ting, 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 isn't it?
Yeah, we
It's
were telling
dangerous.
retailers, you know, my fashion industry days when I was fashion director at Grace Brothers department stores, we were telling retailers in the 90s that this was coming. And they
Really?
were in denial. I was doing breakfasts for the Retailers Association
Yeah.
when I
I've
first
been
started
very,
my, yeah, and then we were
no, I,
saying this is coming, you know, oh no,
you know,
no,
I will
people
sit
will
on
always,
No, I will sit at the TV. It's dangerous, and I'll be on my phone. I'll be scrolling through Facebook. Oh, there's a jumper, and before, like, dun, 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 dun. But I've been able to get a pause, and I'll just go, "Do I really need that, Anne Marie?" But it is true, that whole behaviour, and it is so convenient. And you hear even some retailers now having what they call a personal shopper's experience, if you will, where a personal shopper will be online with someone and will actually hold up clothes, try them on with the sizes and so forth. And I mean, if we don't have to go and find parking and all of those things, I
yep,
mean, to me, that's amazing, because then you can carry on with your day, can't you?
yep,
So there, but consumer behavior has changed, as have
yes,
employees' behavior exchange. I mean, I was just talking to someone in the US today, Janet, who was saying that a lot of organizations, particularly in the US too, are finding it hard to find staff, because staff now realize, well, why do I need to come into the office? I can work quite conveniently from home. And by the way, I want more of a flexible, oh no, well then I'll actually start my own company, my own business. I've always wanted to do that. A lot of people now are looking more seriously around that whole purpose driven, what is it going to
exactly,
fulfill me? I think as organizations, we need to be very mindful about that too, because our consumers are basing their purchase decision around core values of
yes,
organizations as well. So we need to be very mindful about how we move forward, because with the beautiful technology we have on our fingertips too, the communication and what we're doing, we need to be mindful that we're always authentic and very much
yep,
integral, trustworthy, because that
yep,
that shift can happen overnight if all of a sudden your audience online gets even a whiff of, hang on a minute, is there authenticity, is there mistrust there? And I think trust moving forward, with all of the mistrust across some of the platform, is going to be a decider for many businesses. And I'm talking even for government and
yes,
those institutions as well. So,
yes, you've hit the nail on the head. There is an incredible amount of mistrust at the moment, especially as a result of the lockdowns and the um, policies that
yeah.
are
Get it
being
going. And that's great for leadership, because all of us as individuals in our business, we are leaders, and the way we lead and gain respect is everything that you've
yes,
shared about, be having that compassion, and
yeah,
we're inspiring people, creating environments which allow them to be their best. Doing the opposite, it just
yes,
won't work anymore. It won't work because we can see through the BS. I'm just saying. I mean, that's going off on another tangent, but it's so important as even leadership. We need to blow up the old, outdated methodologies of what leadership is and how we lead teams. I
yes.
think.
I'd be happy to have a conversation with you about that another time, because that,
Yeah.
I've worked in leadership now for probably 40 years. I know I don't look that old, and I think that the that it's only in the last few years, when there's been so much global disruption, that I've really understood, using your words, what it means to be a trusted and authentic leader, and
Yes.
how important that is. And and as a coach, a leadership, innovation and executive and team coach, really it is a big journey. And if anything, the leadership paradigm, the last time it shifted was in the 90s. And
Yes.
it's shifting again to a whole new set of competencies, a whole new set of capabilities, and a whole new set of mindsets and behaviors. And that's what we're teaching at ImagineNation. And to say that, so thinking that essentially I'm a designer, from graphic to fashion to learning, it has taken me a long time to create what we would call a really coherent leadership curriculum. And I think we've only just really gotten there,
Yeah.
in the last few months. And COVID gave us the space
To be able.
which is all those post-its on my board at the back.
Yeah.
COVID gave us the space to make it really coherent and teachable, because
Yeah.
it's new language, it's new ways of
It
thinking,
has
new
to
ways
be
of
from
being.
across all
Yep,
institutions, from solopreneur right through to
yep.
large organizations. We will get you back and we'll dive deep into that, because we need to rewrite the books.
Well, we do. Yeah.
And people such as yourself, because the way moving forward, because of such the great, word reset, I guess, comes. That may not be the best way to approach it, but things have changed so dramatically. If all of a sudden things start going back to some form, it'll be different. And then we go, well, now we're going to embrace the way that we've always done things. No, you can't. You cannot continue, because there are so many more things that are going to come to the forefront that needs to be managed, and that's not
Yep.
able to be managed at the moment, because I think people and organizations, governments and so forth are still reactive. We're still reacting.
Yes.
And once that kind of goes, there'll be a whole lot of other things that need to be addressed and not swept under the table, because that'll be, these things festering have the ability again to cause, the inability to be productive and all of that kind of stuff. So let's dive deeper into that. I know that you've already shared how to get in contact with you. I know we've got a little bit longer, but it was such a valuable conversation, as I knew it would be. But thank you for taking that time, and we look forward to getting you back on the show again, and we'll dive deep into what a new leadership, what that means, what a new model of leadership, the languaging, all of that for moving forward. So thanks once again, Janet.
And thank you for having me, and everybody stay safe and well, and be playful and inventive and creative, and dance at the edges of those growth zones and have some fun.
Absolutely. Fun is one of my core values. So I absolutely wholeheartedly agree. Thanks, Janet.
Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by theinfluencealliance.com. Want to influence real change with your message by becoming known as a trusted authority in your industry while building a sustainable and scalable business you love? Find out how by accessing our free podcast series at www.theinfluencealliance.com/podcast series. That's theinfluencealliance.com/